This is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And welcome to Midday with Reverend Don. And if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you will know that whatever platform you may be watching this on, if you type your comments or questions on that platform, they'll appear here in my chat room, and we can interact directly, which is the most enjoyable part of this broadcast. So hello, everyone. And for those of us in the United States, today is July 4th, Independence Day, marks the founding of the nation. So happy July 4th. Of course, not all of our viewers are in the United States, but for those who are here, I hope you're enjoying your holiday. And hello to Michael in the chat room. Good to see you, Michael. And today is a day that's widely held to celebrate ideas of freedom and liberty, which, as a nation, we have tried to strive for throughout our history. I think that's one way to put it. And hello to Mary in the chat room. Good to see you, Mary. Certainly, we have had an imperfect record, but I think the desire to strive for greater perfection in these matters has always been present in at least part of our population. Hello to Janet in the chat room. Good to see you. Hello to Raven in the chat room. Good to see you, Raven. And yesterday, if you remember, I was talking about an issue that is directly relevant to this. The city council meeting in Hoopston 20 years ago, where we were ambushed by radicalized Christians in an evening that nearly boiled over into violence, to the point that, you know, the police felt they had to escort us out of town, even going so far as to allow us to leave the building before allowing anyone else to do so, on the premise that that allowed us to leave quickly and avoided potential violence. So when we talk about freedom, when we talk about liberty, there are many people in this country for whom this is not a done deal. And, you know, pagans and Wiccans are certainly among those people. There are still issues. I was asked if I felt we had come forward or backward since that time. I think that both of these are true. In some ways, we've very much come forward. In others, the situation has, in some places, in some ways, gone backward. In a lot of ways, we're still just trying to go forward. But, you know, we're one of those groups of people who basically are only asking to exist as who we are, and to interact with the world based on our actions, and not the fact that our religious beliefs are different from some others. And there are a lot of groups who are in the same position. They only really want to go forward based on who they are and what their actions are, rather than their differences from other groups. And I think that this is very important for us to be mindful of, because if you're watching this, you're most likely pagan or Wiccan, or at least metaphysical, and therefore in a potentially marginalized community. And the extent to which you feel that probably depends on which of these headings you come under and how publicly you express that. But it is something important to remember. Normally on this day, I'd be wearing the Order of the Pentacle. It, however, has not been unpacked yet. But this is the order that was given by the Order of the Pentacle. That they've given this decoration to pagan military veterans, and also people who took part in the fight, to win for them the right to have a pentagram on their tombstone. And I and the church that I headed were involved in that fight, and did do a lot in it. Selena Fox and Pete Pathfinder Davis led the fight, but we were there and we did some significant things. But this speaks to the fact that, yes, we are still marginalized, even though we were a fully recognized religion to the extent that the US recognizes religions, and yet still discrimination from our government. Other groups, far more marginal in terms of numbers, had no difficulty getting their symbols on their military gravestones. It took us 11 years from the first application that I know of. And it was later admitted it was purely religious prejudice that held it back. And we must be aware that we still face this, and we must still work to overcome it. We must be mindful of this, whether we like to be or not. And people in marginalized communities often resent the fact that they have to consider things like how people react to them in a different way than others do. But it simply is a practical truth. We have to consider our image. We have to consider how people react to us. We have to consider a lot of details that someone more mainstream, for want of a better way to put it, would not have to consider. And I mentioned yesterday, in that city council meeting, one of the things that happened was that one of the radicalized Christians, who was not, I believe, from that actual community, but had been bussed in, pointed out that they were certain that, yes, we practiced black magic because they had seen people online talking about putting love spells on people and other things, because we had specifically used that example as something we would not approve of. And, I had to admit, to myself at least, that yes, it was true. He certainly would have seen that online. I had seen it online. Being indulged in by people who were not considering how that would be responded to. And yeah, there's a level where maybe we ought not have to think about such things, but if we don't think about it, we'll have to deal with it. And this is true in all aspects of our representation. I always say that if we don't like how we're being represented, we must represent ourselves. But that comes with a lot of things, and how we represent ourselves is a daily thing. And so many different things are encompassed within that. And hello to Deb in the chat room. Good to see you, Deb. And it really is something that we all have to handle in our own way. We all have our own path. One of the things I talk about, though, quite often is interfaith language, that you can make far more inroads with a person who perhaps has no knowledge of what paganism is, or what Wicca or Correllianism are, by using language and forms that they're familiar with to introduce them, than by insisting that they immediately accept unfamiliar terms that we would commonly use. And hello to Renee in the chat room. Good to see you, Renee. An example of that is talking about deity, as opposed to always using the phrase goddess and God, or whatever you might use, but in an interfaith situation or working with someone who does not know anything about what you're talking about, using the undifferentiated term deity or even spirit can be helpful in having that initial conversation. Talking about services rather than ritual can be helpful in that initial conversation, because they know what that is and they don't have preconceived negative ideas about it. Walking around whatever preconceptions they may have can be important in initial conversations. And too often we don't think about this. And I've often pointed out, when I sat down to write the first degree Correllian lessons, it had to be pointed out to me by Sir Edward that people who would be reading this would not know some of the jargon I was using, because I was so far into my own life in Correllian Wicca, which basically had been my whole life. And my priesthood at that point was just under 20 years, that, it was second nature to me to use these specialized terms and not think of explaining them. but someone who had never heard them wouldn't know what I was saying. And so I went back and changed those things. And this was very important. It's one of the things that, in retrospect, I'm most proud of with those lessons, that they're accessible to people who have no background, who might not have the range of vocabulary that I have. I rephrased it to make it accessible to a much wider group of people, as wide as I could make it. And I think that this is important. It's also important when we first interact with people who don't know us. When we make ourselves accessible to them, when we make ourselves likable to them, as opposed to immediately throwing up walls, I think we do much better in the long term. I mean, we all know the person who has to tell you they're a witch in the first five minutes of talking to them, which depending on how you broach the subject is, can be taken in different ways, but it's most likely going to throw up a wall to the people you're talking to if they don't have the background. I think it's much better to come in that accessible way that they can understand, and move them to the point that they see that you're not talking about something bad. You're talking about something good. But they have to be listening to ever hear that. And if you shut off their ears immediately, they won't listen. Hello to Ravenwolf in the chat room. Good to see you, Ravenwolf. And, it's always wonderful to see everyone in the chat room. And I love it when you say hello. And I love to know you're here. Years ago, I did podcasting. And I did the Pagan Pundit Show. I did the Corellian Family Hour. And often I had less knowledge of who was watching. And hello to Bigfoot Eats in the chat room. I love that name. And hello to Brenda in the chat room. But I have to say, it is very, very much appreciated to know you're here and that I'm not just talking to the ether. I would still do that, and I realize these are recorded programs. People will watch them later. But it's nice to know that we're actually having live interaction. Hello to Mary Hawk in the chat room. Hello to Diane in the chat room. I mean, it really is a lovely interaction. And hello to Robin Dakay in the chat room. Good to see you, Robin. And it's interesting. I was surprised how few fireworks there were last night. There were plenty. In fact, there were a few going off a few moments ago, you may have heard. But compared to what I would have expected in Jacksonville, absolutely much less. And hello to Julia in the chat room. Good to see you, Julia. And I don't know necessarily why that is, but there was enough to be respectful. I remember around 11:30, I heard this loud crash, and I thought, oh, lovely. Someone's amateur firework has landed on the metal roof of the patio. But it actually wasn't that. It was something else. But it was interesting. And hello to Kim in the chat room. Good to see you, Kim. And Kim says, Kim is here in Danville. She has been the maiden priestess of Pure Sanctuary Temple in past years, and she says that lots of the fireworks have been postponed for 2 weeks, which I didn't realize. That would explain a lot. And Brenda says there's a big show in Champaign tonight. Mary from Florida says we need our fix because our power is out. And so that's one reason people are using their fireworks. So yeah, I guess that does explain a lot, and I can certainly see why some would be postponed. There are a number of possible reasons: the smoke coming down from Canada, the power outages, which for some are still ongoing, I should say. So that's good to know. When I was a child, we had a family custom. We would do some amateur fireworks in the backyard, and then we'd go down to the Gao Grotto, which is the local country club that was founded in the 1920s, and which, interestingly enough, my grandparents were charter members of. And though my parents did not belong to My father was not keen on that sort of thing. But we would park on the bridge along with many other people from Danville and watch their fireworks display, which went over the Vermilion River. And we would see the little boat on the river where they were being sent up from, and they had a respectable display for a town, for a mid-sized town like this. Nothing compared, of course, to Chicago or Jacksonville. But it would last a good 45 minutes, and it was absolutely beautiful. It was a professional display, very well done. I'm assuming it's still going on. I don't know. And Kim says the uncertainty of power available for first responders is the primary reason they've been delayed, and that makes absolute sense because if there were to be an accident, the power outages could prove a problem in responding to that. So I'm glad to know that. Thank you, Kim. And I'm actually glad to know that they've done that because that's a very citizen-oriented response. People can still have their fireworks, but waiting until the power outages are resolved. That makes good sense. I'm personally extremely happy our power outage was resolved, but and Thunder Over the Lake, I guess that's the name of the show I was just describing, has been rescheduled to July 15th. And Magical Mermaid says it's lovely that there will be drone light shows instead of non-environment friendly fireworks that can harm animals and humans, and that is lovely. And it's an example of how technology is advancing and can still be looked to solve certain problems. And I believe those drone light shows can be every bit as spectacular as old-fashioned fireworks. And they don't have the negative side effects. And I've seen some of them in other contexts that I was very impressed by. And I think that's a lovely thing for the future. Actually, I've spent a lot of morning talking about the importance of new technology and how technology is changing. An important event in my life recently hinged apparently on that change in technology, and it should be obvious to anyone looking that advances in AI technology and other things are totally changing what we can expect technology to be like in the future. And hiding in past technology is going to be a very unsuccessful thing to do. A Magical Mermaid points out that those drone light shows mean that no more fires being started by amateur fireworks, no more children's fingers getting blown off, and this is certainly true. And Jason, my nephew, hello Jason, says that drone light shows are also very impressive, and they are. And Kim had mentioned that Thunder Over the Lake will be July 15th. I also have an event going to be held on July 15th at 7 p.m. Central or 8 p.m. Eastern, A Night with the Corellian Ancestors. It will be part of my Patreon, but there will be tickets available for people who are not part of the Patreon. And it will be a night of stories about the Corellian ancestors and some channeling of messages from the ancestors. So I hope you'll consider joining me for that. Later today or tomorrow, there'll be more about that posted on my page and probably elsewhere. And Ravenwolf says that there were some fireworks there last night where Ravenwolf is, but they could not see them, but only heard them. And hello to Melanie in the chat room. Good to see you, Melanie. And Melanie is one of our Corellians who, along with many other affiliations she has, Melanie was the High Priestess at Panthea Temple in Chicago and the head of the Order of the Library. But Melanie has a presentation at the Parliament of the World's Religions on the secret ritual work of women, which I'm looking forward to seeing. And that will be Thursday of that week. And Ravenwolf asks if I need mediums to help with channeling. Perhaps. Let me see. And Mary says, oh yes, I can't wait. Wonderful. It will be interesting. And people who have heard the stories of the Corellian ancestors know that they were quite a crew. I often tell the story of how Lady Bitterwind observed our oracle work with the ancestors. And this is back in probably the late 70s. And everything at that time was very august, very dignified, um, not severe. My late wife had a severe relationship with her spirit guides. Our relationship with the ancestors was not severe, but it was very dignified. And Bitterwind said, you know, I've heard the stories about these people. Um, they were a bunch of rounders, I think is the term she used. Um, and, you know, they could be dignified, but she said that she believed that we were censoring our communication with them because of our expectations of them. And that if we allowed them to, they would be far more lively and humorous than we were allowing them to be. We expected spirit guides to behave in a certain way. And so we censored the ancestors. And the obviousness of this statement immediately caused us to go to the ancestors and to ask them, are we censoring you? And their answer literally was, well, duh. Um, and from that day forward, our interactions with them were far more lively and humorous. Um, Mary says, I don't think I've heard many of the stories. So yeah, I'll probably tell some of the same ones I tell all the time. But there are a lot of stories. The Perry Parker case is one of the more interesting ones. Um, it involves my mother and grandmother hiding behind trash cans to avoid reporters, something my mother remembered her whole life. And also showed up in the commercial news, the newspaper here in Danville. One of the things I'm hoping to do is to get a library card in the near future, so I can go down to the library, which has the commercial news morgues, and get the newspaper stories on many of these things, and put them up on my page. Because I know there are newspaper stories of, for example, the Perry Parker case. I've read them. My grandmother had kept the clippings, though I no longer have them, but there was story after story after story. I mean, it kept this town in rapt attention for a couple of weeks at least, before they finally decided, yes, the poor man had committed suicide. And Kim says, Lady Bitterwind lived outside the box. I love the way she laughed at tradition and paved her own way, and that perfectly describes Lady Bitterwind. Her first affiliation was Discordianism, and then Corellianism, and you know that's a streak through the Corellian tradition. That's true for Sir Edward as well. But if you look at the High Corel family, we've always kind of had that chaotic streak. Brenda says she'd love to hear more about the story. So we'll probably talk about the Great Federal Shootout. We'll talk about the unfortunate lynching. We'll probably talk about Great Uncle George, although I think I talked about him just yesterday, probably. Certainly recently. And then there are other things that are more obscure. One of my favorite stories is the story of my mother and the knocking cabinet. We might talk a bit about the Spiritualist Church and also the Universalist Church. You know, today, the people will think of Unitarian Universalism as the thing, but in fact, these were two different organizations. And when we were affiliated with the Universalist Church, it was its own separate thing. And of course, we were heavily affiliated with spiritualism as well. Mary says, Lady Bitterwind sounds like she was an amazing person. Oh my goodness, she was. Her artwork was like no one else's. She was like no one else. I have some wonderful pictures of her. Maybe I should put some up. Her clothing was, she had that Molly Weasley style, for want of a better way to put it. She loved bright colors and strong patterns. And she wasn't really concerned with what anyone else thought of what she chose to wear, or much of anything else. She lived what made her happy. One of the people I follow on Instagram is David Ross Lawn, I believe, who's very big on wearing what makes you happy. What makes him happy are kind of romantic 1970s dresses. And, you know, more power to him. And Kim says her laugh was close to a cackle without actually trying, and she's right, it was. Jason says you never knew what she was going to say. That's true. That's very true. And Ravenwolf says, I'm still getting used to my whole wardrobe change. I'm sure you are. And, wear what makes you happy. That's what I've always done. Right now I'm not doing the ties. We'll see if I go back to them. But everyone who's follows my work knows that I have always affected a certain style, usually defined by suits and ties, and jewelry. And I never really worried about what anyone else thought. I wore this because I wanted to wear it. And to a certain extent, I worried about what my mother thought in spirit, because some of this did have to do with her preferences and my grandparents' preferences. But styles change. I've chosen to retain a certain look because it's my preference. And Mary asks, where is the pentacle of wrap? And it's right here, because I was wearing it yesterday. Oh, there it is. Yeah, the wrap star pentacle. And Ravenwolf asks, do I think there's a type of mysticism with the clothes we desire or wear? And my answer is yes, I do think that. I think that clothes are very metaphysical, which is one of the reasons that I would never just throw something on and not think about it. Unless maybe it were an emergency. And Mary says, laugh out loud, that's awesome. Mary Hawk says that. Mary Cavalcante says, I love the color blue on you. Thank you. This shirt is a gift from my niece, Lori Blackman. And I do love this color. And Jason says, because in public, you're always on stage. And yes, that is true. I've always looked at it that way. I was raised from childhood to look at it that way. And I mean, there are pictures of me in suits and ties as a child, but that's not what I wore for every day as a child. But my mother was always concerned, until I started dressing myself, at which point I was concerned that the colors go together, that things have been put together with thought. And I was raised with that concept from the very first time I was allowed to dress myself. Or participate in that process, that you consider how you look. You consider what flatters you, what looks good with your particular figure. I have a particular figure, it's round. So I'm very concerned with vertical line, although it's not round like it used to be. I am now in the 230s, which is a weight I've never been at as an adult. In fact, not even as a teenager. I have to go back to preteen years to be that way, which makes it a very new experience for me. And the biggest thing I've noticed is how messed up my back is, because I can actually feel my backbone now. Ravenwolf says, you look great, Lord Don. Thank you, Ravenwolf. And Kimberly says, clothing gives us both protection and confidence, and this is 100% true. And Brenda says, first impressions are always lasting. That's 100% true, too. We're going to talk for a moment about the metaphysics of clothing. And we're almost at the end of our half hour, so I'm not going to detain you by going into a long talk about it. But things like color have a metaphysical significance, and when you wear them, they influence you. Blue is very good, for example, for receptivity and communication. Red is good for vitality. Jewelry, when it has metaphysical significance, this is a sun and moon combination, which references the Corellian first priesthood. I am first priest retired in office, because it is a life office that cannot be given up. But you can retire from the daily routine, which is what I did. You can never retire as first priesthood. It's always there. In fact, throughout my entire period of the last, I don't know how many years, every week I would spend a half hour talking with both Lady Crystal and Lady Stephanie separately for half an hour a week, every week. Because simply because she was retired in office did not mean Lady Crystal was not first priestess still and needed to be kept informed and consulted. And I certainly did. But how you choose colors, how you put them together, these things do affect your energy. And as Kim was saying, clothing also can give confidence. And, I'll tell you, when I was a teenager, when I put on my suit and tie, or my suit, I didn't always wear a tie then because it was the 1970s, but I did love the suit jackets. And I wore ties for the more formal occasions. I felt like I was wearing armor, that I could go into any situation much more effectively than when I was not dressed that way. Maggie, hello Maggie in the chat room. Good to see you, Maggie. And Maggie says, my permanent impression is how you carry yourself, Lord Don. And clothes come secondary. And thank you, Maggie. I'd like to think I carry myself well. And yes, but I think we're always a total impression. And I think far too few people think about the impression they're making. Now, Maggie thinks about the impression she makes. She's a very elegant, stylish woman. I don't know how much effort she puts into that because we've never discussed it. It could be effortless, but she always is put together. And I think it's important. And there are many different ways to look. You don't have to be super formal to be put together. But some people are certainly more mindful of this than others. And I think it does affect, particularly if you're dealing with like a government body, it affects how you're received. I've told the Pete Pathfinder story many times and quoted Starhawk in saying that if you're going to talk to a government body, that's when men should put on their suits and women should put on their pearls. And this is still true. How you present yourself has a lot to do with how you're received and how you're treated. But with that, I see we've come to the end of our half hour, so we're going to have our prayer. And I want to remind everyone, if you'd like to join my Patreon, if you'd like to support me in my work, that's the best way to do it. You can do that at revdonlewis.com. There are numerous options to do it, ranging from the most inexpensive tier, which brings you the weekly chat room, to more expensive tiers that bring you many different things. Or you could get a reading with me. You can schedule that with me through email at donlewishp@aol.com, or through Instant Messenger at Facebook, or Instagram. Lots of ways to do it. And I appreciate all the support that I get. And with that, let us have our prayer. And here we go. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we ask you to help us to have the freedom that we claim in life, the freedom we desire in life, the freedom we make for ourselves in life. And when we are denied freedom and liberty, let us work against that denial. And equally, when we see others denied their freedom and liberty, let us work against those denials too. Let us remember that it's not only us, but many people still working for full acceptance. And let us work with them, as we hope they work with us, for full social acceptance. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we ask you to keep our minds and our hearts open, and to help us to be an expression of the highest ideals that we wish to see in the world, that we may be the change we wish to see. And we thank you, and knowing you are always with us, but from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence, and again, if you're in the United States, I wish you a happy 4th of July / Independence Day. And if you're not in the United States, I wish you a happy National Day whenever it happens to fall. And thank you all for being here. I'll be back tomorrow. I hope to see you then. I love you all. I love spending this time with you. And until next time, with much love, may you be blessed now and